Okay, so in the last lesson, I showed you how to add together two binary numbers, and I just want to recap that briefly. So, in the event that you have a binary number that you want to add to another binary number, what you need to remember is that if there's only one 1 in the column, you just can drop down the 1 because 0 and 1 is 1. If there are two 1s, what you are effectively doing is you are saying 1 plus 1 is 2, and the way you write 2 is 1, 0. So the way that you write 2 across two different columns is by carrying the 1 and bringing down a 0. So it's the same thing as saying 1 and 1 is 2. And we write 2 by saying 1, 0 across the two different columns. So when we have three 1s in a column, what we're basically saying is 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. How do you write 3? You write it like this. And so the way you're going to do this is you're going to carry a 1 and drop down a 1, which is the same thing as writing 3. So that's what I want you to understand as a precursor to how to do subtraction. So now let's start with a very simple problem, which is 8 minus 4. Now we already know the answer needs to be 4, but let's look at how we do this. If we have 0 minus 0, we know the answer is 0. So we can immediately take care of the first two columns, and now we are left with 0 minus 1. But don't think of it as 0 minus 1. Think of it as 2 minus 1. Well, 2 minus 1 is 1. So we just simply write 1 there, and we have our answer, which is 8 minus 4 is 4. Let's look at another example. So here we're going to say 7 minus 6. Alright, so what do we do? We have 1 minus 0 is 1. Then we have 1 minus 1 is 0. 1 minus 1 is 0. And 0 minus 0 is 0. And it's very simple. And of course 7 minus 6 is 1. So you see how that works. It's very easy if you have 0 minus 0 or 1 minus 0 or 1 minus 1. The only complication is when you have 0 minus 1. And when you have 0 minus 1, you have to look at the columns to the left in order to solve it. Now let me show you another example. So let's say that we have a 0 minus 1, and we'll make the problem a little bit more complex. Let's say this, which is 5 minus 3. Now how do we do this? Okay, first of all, 1 minus 1 is 0. Now we look at the 2's column, where we have this 0 minus 1, but that doesn't really work for us, so now we have to consider the 4's column also. So we're going to consider this entire space here, and what we're going to say is that 2 minus 1 is 1, so we're just going to write 1. And there's our answer. And if you look at it, what we're saying is 5 minus 3 is 2. And what happens if we have a 0 minus 1 where the column immediately over does not contain a 1? Let's take a look at that. So we're going to say that we have a 0 minus 1 where the next column has no 1s, and then maybe we have something like this. So this is 8 minus 3. Now how do we do this? Well, first of all, 0 minus 1, we really can't do that. So let's look at the next column over. Okay, now we have 0 minus 3. We really can't do that. And so we look at the next column over, and we still really can't do that. So we look at the next column over, and now we have 8 minus 3. which we could do. We could just simply know what the answer is and write it out. But another way of thinking of this is that we can borrow from one column in order to make the problem different. And the way we do this is we're going to take the 8 away, and we're going to make it as if we had 2 4s in order to make that 8. So what I basically did is I said that the 8 has now become 2 4s. That's how you borrow in binary. So now we're going to take one of those 4s and we're going to say that it becomes 2 2s. And now what we can do is we can take one of those 2s and make it become 2 1s. And now we can do the problem. We can basically say 2 minus 1 is 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. 1 minus 0 is 1. And we destroyed this, so it's a 0, so we can just simply drop down a 0. Now let's take a look at it. We started with the problem 8 minus 3. We know that we should get a 5, and we see that we do. Now what I just showed you is that you can borrow from any column, and when you do that, you're going to you're basically saying that the column immediately over to the right will have 2 new 1s in it when you destroy the 1 in the column immediately over to the left. Let's look at the same example one more time. It's very clear. So again, we're saying 8 minus 3, which we know the answer is going to be 5, and here's how we do that. First of all, the 1 right here, which represents 8 because it's a 1 in the 8's place, well, 8 is the same thing as 4 and 4. So we're going to destroy this 1, and we're going to make that a 0, and then we're going to add 2 1s into the 4's column. And what we've done here is we've said where we used to have a 1 in the 8's column, now we have 2 1s in the 4's column. Now we can take one of those 1s, destroy it, and in doing so we're saying that the 4 is being converted into 2 2s. The 1 in the 2's column is actually 2. So now we have destroyed one of these 1s, which is actually a 4 because it's in the 4's column, and now we have 2 1s in the 2's column. We can destroy one of those, and now we have 2 1s in the 1's column, which is the same thing as 2. So now you're saying that 2 minus 1 is 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. And 1 minus 0 is 1. And finally 0 minus 0 is 0. Now, if you can, you don't have to borrow like this. If you can just look at the number and understand what it is in binary, you can look at it in the very beginning and understand that 8 minus 3 is 5 and just write out what the answer actually is. But if you need to borrow, and sometimes you do, it's important to understand the method. So let's look at our example here. Let's suppose that we have 16 minus 7. Alright, so here's what we're going to do. we're going to borrow from the 16 column and get 2 8s. We're going to borrow one of the 8s and get 2 4s, borrow one of the 4s, get 2 2s, borrow one of the 2s, and get 2 1s. Okay, and here we go. We can say 2 minus 1 is 1. Then we say 1 minus 1 is 0. 1 minus 1 is 0. I'm sorry. That should be okay. 1 minus 1 is 0. 1 minus 1 is 0. And then 1 minus 0 is 1. And lastly, here we have a 0 because we borrowed that 1, so it's just 0 minus 0 is 0, and we can take a look at the final result. 16 minus 7 is 9. 8 and 1 is 9. So you see how it works. Now you only have to borrow from the columns as you need to. You don't always have to borrow all the way over to the place. So let me show you an example like that. Let's say we have 20, which is 16 plus 4, minus, let's say, 6. So if we have 20 minus 6, what we do is we say, okay, 0 minus 0 is 0. 0 minus 1, okay, we can't do that. We need to borrow. So how do we borrow? We take a 4 and we convert it into 2 2s. And now what we can do is we can say that 4, let me rewrite that. I meant to use this nice red laser. 4, because we're in the 2's column, so 2 and 2 is 4, and 4 minus 2 is 2. And we write 2 by just simply bringing down a 1. A 1 in the 2's column is 2. So what we just said is 4 minus 2 is 2. And now we have, in the next column, this is a 0, this is a 1. So we're saying effectively 0 minus 1. We can't do that, we need to borrow. Well, we can't borrow from this column, so now we have to borrow from this column. So what is this column? Well, we have 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. You have to know what the column is in order to understand how this works. So in the 16's column, we're borrowing, and that means we're going to be able to transform the 16 into 2 8s. Now we can borrow one of those 8s and get 2 4s. And now we can do it. In this column, we have 2 4s, which is 8, minus 1 4, which is 4. 8 minus 4 is 4. That's the same thing as if you were saying 2 minus 1 is 2. So you can see the method here is really simple. When you have 2 1s, minus 1 1, you get 1 1. And that's how you do it inside the column. So now we go over to the left and we have 1 minus 0 is 1. And then this is all zeros. And now we can go ahead and add it up. We have the 1's place, 2, 4, 8. So we have 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And this is 14. And now we see that 20 minus 6 is 14. That's how you do it. So let me recap the method one more time to make sure that you understand this. Okay, so if we have a subtraction problem that we have to borrow, let's look at one more example so that this becomes crystal clear. So let's look at 17 minus 11. Okay, So only borrow where you have to. If it's 1 minus 1, you don't have to borrow. You can just say 1 minus 1 is 0. Now we have to borrow. We have 0 minus 1. Okay, so we can't borrow from here because it's all zeros. We can't borrow from here because you can only borrow from the numbers on the top. This is another 0 minus 1, so we can't borrow from this column. If we try to get rid of this 1 and then put 2 1s here, the problem is we still haven't addressed that this is actually 0 minus 1, and so it won't work. You won't get the right answer. We have to borrow from the top row, and that means this is the only number we can borrow from. So here's how we do it. We destroy the 16 and we get 2 8s. Now we destroy one of those 8s and we get 2 4s. We destroy one of those 4s and we get 2 2s, and now we can solve the problem. So we say 2 minus 1 is 1. Then we say 1 minus 0 is 1. We say that 1 minus 1 is 0, and of course 0 minus 0 is 0. And now we can check it to see if we're right. And we have 17 minus 11, which is of course 6. And you see how this works. So there you go. That is how to subtract two binary numbers. It's not that difficult. I do recommend that you practice it, especially practice it with problems that you know the answer to, so you can see how the method. So for example, if you have 8 minus 3, you already know the answer is going to be 5. You already know that you write 5 like this, so all you have to do is make sure that when you solve the problem you get your desired result. So we say, okay, 0 minus 1 we can't do, 0 minus 1 we can't do, we have to borrow from here, so we destroy the 8, we get 2 4s, we destroy a 4, we get 2 2s, we destroy a 2, we get 2 1s. Now we say 2 minus 1 is 1. Then we say 1 minus 1 is 0. Then we say 1 minus 0 is 1. And lastly, 0 minus 0 is 0. And there you go. And you see you've got the right answer. So I hope this helped you out. If you have any questions, feel free to post them.